Long before that winter of 2007, before the snow packed down like concrete and the wind sliced through every layer you owned, Lucas and I were inseparable. We'd met in second grade, side by side in Mrs. Whitaker's class. He was the kid with skinned knees and a grin that dared the world to test him. I was quieter, the one reminding him to grab his backpack before the bell or to duck when he hurled rocks at hornets' nests. Somehow we balanced each other out. He brought the chaos. I brought the breaks. By 17, we were more like brothers than friends. My parents liked him, but always worried about how far he'd go to push a line. His parents liked me because I kept him from crossing it. If Lucas was the spark, I was the damp towel he couldn't quite shake off. That fall broke something in him. Mariah, his girlfriend of almost 2 years, called it quits after too many parking lot screaming matches. She accused him of lying, sneaking out, drinking too much. I never knew what was real, but I'd seen him that night, slamming his fists into the steering wheel hard enough to leave bruises. He didn't cry, not in front of me, but something in his eyes changed, like a light gone dim. We had a ritual, late-night drives. No plan, no curfew, just miles of road rolling under the tires. Duluth was all hills and sharp turns that spilled down toward Lake Superior, where the water at night looked like an endless sheet of black glass. Street lamps hummed over frozen sidewalks, and out on the county roads the world narrowed to the reach of your headlights. Driving was how we escaped, how we pretended our lives were bigger than that small-town silence. The night everything changed started like all the others, a Friday, bitterly cold. The kind of night that made your breath freeze before it left your mouth. I was half asleep over a history textbook when the crunch of tires outside pulled me to the window. Lucas's old Suburban idled at the curb, headlights casting gold on the snowdrifts. He didn't need to call. He never did. When I climbed in, the heater rattling against the cold, I knew something was off. His jaw was tight, his knuckles pale around the wheel. No smirk, no ready to waste some gas? Just a flat, let's drive. I can't stay in my head right now. We rode in silence for the first half hour, music blasting loud enough to blur our thoughts. Outside, snow flurried past the windshield. Houses glowed with early Christmas lights, though it was still weeks till December. But the longer we drove, the weirder his energy got. His laugh turned sharp, almost forced. His words came clipped, brittle. There was a look in his eyes that wasn't heartbreak. It was something darker. By 3 a.m., I realized we'd been looping the same back roads. When we passed that rusted old gas station again, I tried to lighten it. Guess the universe wants us to stop for snacks. He didn't even blink. His grip on the wheel tightened. Then, barely above a whisper, he said it. Snow covers everything. Bodies too. The words didn't hit all at once. They crawled in cold and wrong. I turned to him, waiting for the usual grin, the gotcha smirk. But he didn't even glance at me. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. Finally free. The heater hummed, the tires hissed on ice, and I stared at the boy beside me, trying to find the friend I knew somewhere behind that blank look. I told myself it was nothing. Just the kind of late-night, half-delirious crap people say when they're tired and hurting. But then he said, clear as day, I buried her where no one will ever find her. And you helped me. For a second, I didn't even process it. Then my stomach dropped. What the hell are you talking about? I demanded. He smiled. Not big, just enough to twist my gut. He didn't answer. Just flicked the turn signal and took us down a narrow road lined with trees heavy under snow. Their branches bent low, skeletal, as if leaning in. I don't know what you're talking about, Lucas, I said, my voice shaking. Don't screw around like that. He glanced at me, eyes glassy. You don't remember? His tone was soft, almost pitying. Then he nodded at my hands. Look at your nails. I looked down. Dirt was packed beneath them, wet, dark, clumped like it came from deep underground. My breath stuttered. I hadn't touched the ground all night. I hadn't even left the car. What is this? I whispered. You helped me, he said. His voice was steady now, calm in a way that made my skin crawl. You wanted to. You just don't want to remember. I scraped at my palms, trying to wipe the dirt away, but it wouldn't come off. Panic burned through me. I replayed the night in my head. The drive, the music, the looping roads. But then there were flashes, gaps I hadn't noticed before, laughter that didn't sound like mine, the feel of freezing air cutting my lungs, the weight of something heavy pressing on my shoulders. No, I said, shaking my head. No, that's not real. Lucas pulled over and cut the engine. The silence was thick enough to choke on. Snow drifted around us, the flakes catching in the headlights before melting into the dark. He turned to me, eyes lit with something feverish. "You remember more than you want to, don't you?" I shook my head again, but the images kept flickering. A shovel, moonlight glinting on metal, my boots sinking into soft earth. And there, Mariah's red scarf, the one with the little white stars half buried in the snow. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Was he trying to plant this in my mind? Or was I uncovering something I'd buried deep enough to forget? "Stop," I whispered. "Please, just stop. Tell me you're messing with me." He leaned closer, his breath fogging between us in the freezing air. "Snow covers everything," he murmured, voice steady, almost reverent. "But not forever." After that, time seemed to dissolve. The hours blurred into a sleepless haze of silence and dread. We drove without direction, the Suburban's engine humming low, headlights carving tunnels through the snow. Lucas's eyes stayed fixed on the road, but I could feel his thoughts darting, toward my dirt-stained nails, toward the empty fields flashing by, toward the shadows stretching long across the snow. At one point, I reached for the radio, just to hear something, a song, a voice, anything. He slapped my hand away, sharp and sudden. "No distractions," he said, eyes never leaving the road. I sat rigid, staring out the window, my mind spinning. If he was telling the truth, if we really had buried someone, why couldn't I remember? And if he was lying, why was there dirt under my nails? By 5 a.m., a faint ribbon of pink cut across the horizon. Lucas finally pulled over beside the frozen lip of Lake Superior. The lake stretched endlessly, a mirror of black glass fractured by ice. He shut off the engine. The silence roared so loud I could hear my own pulse. "Tell me what you see," he said. I blinked. "The lake." He shook his head. "No, tell me what you remember." "I don't," I said quietly. "You do." His hand shot out, clamping around my wrist. His grip was like iron. "Say it! Let go!" I tried to pull back, but his fingers dug in deeper. My throat tightened. Then, like a film reel skipping to life, images hit me in bursts. Mud sticking to my gloves, my heartbeat hammering, Lucas's voice shouting, "Dig faster!" And a scream. Short, sharp, cut off mid-breath. I wrenched my arm free, threw the door open, and stumbled out into the cold. The air slapped me hard, burning my lungs, but it didn't chase away the panic. I bent over, gasping, staring at my hands. The dirt was still there. Still real, and God help me, it matched the memory. Lucas leaned against the hood, exhaling a white plume. His tone was quiet now, almost smug. "See? You're not as innocent as you think." "No," I snapped. "I'd never." He didn't blink. "You already did." The sunrise painted his face gold, but it didn't warm him. His eyes looked hollow, bottomless pits that refused to reflect the light. I thought about running, but the snow was knee-deep on either side of the road and we were miles from town. He had the keys. He was stronger. So I stood there trembling, caught between believing he was confessing to murder or dragging me down into his delusion. The sky turned from pink to blinding white. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For one breath, I thought of calling the police, just blurting everything, begging for help. But what would I say? My best friend claims we buried his ex-girlfriend, and now I don't know what's real. They'd laugh. Or worse, they'd find proof. Lucas's gaze flicked to my pocket. "Don't even think about it," he said softly, like a teacher scolding a child. "Nobody would believe you." My voice cracked. "Why are you doing this?" He tilted his head. "Because lies rot you from the inside. You need to face the truth." "What truth?" I shouted. "That you've lost your mind? That you're trying to drag me into it?" For the first time, his expression broke. His jaw trembled. His eyes glistened. "You think this is just me?" he whispered. "You think I could carry this alone?" Something in his voice, raw, aching, made my stomach turn. Doubt clawed its way back in. What if he wasn't lying? What if I had helped? What if there'd been a night, soaked in adrenaline and rage, where I'd crossed a line so terrible, my mind refused to keep it? But then I remembered Mariah's face at school just 2 days before. Angry, alive, slamming her locker door. Unless memory was slipping again, unless time itself was twisting. I backed away, step by step, until the soles of my boots hit the frozen edge of the lake. The ice groaned beneath me. "I didn't do anything," I whispered. "I didn't." Lucas smiled faintly, but it wasn't cruel anymore. Just tired. "Keep telling yourself that." We drove back in silence. The roads wound endlessly, and the Suburban's engine growled low, like it was straining under the weight of what had just passed between us. I stared out the window at the drifting snow, each flake blurring into the next, wondering if I'd ever know what was true. When we finally pulled into my driveway, the sky was bright and colorless. My neighborhood looked normal, sleepy, safe. My mom's car was parked out front, frost sparkling on the windshield. For a second, I wanted to believe none of it had happened. But as I opened the door, Lucas caught my wrist one last time. His grip was light this time, almost tender. "Snow doesn't keep secrets forever," he said softly. Then he let go. I stumbled inside, my heart battering against my ribs. I went straight to the sink, scrubbing my hands raw under hot water. The dirt wouldn't come off. After that, I stopped answering his calls. At school, we barely spoke, though. I could still feel his eyes on me from across the room, steady, searching. Mariah vanished the next week. Some said she'd gone to Wisconsin to live with her aunt. Others said she'd dropped out. No one really knew. And neither did I. Sometimes I dream about it. Shovels breaking frozen ground, laughter that isn't mine, a scream swallowed by the wind. Other nights I wake convinced Lucas planted it all. Lies, dirt, guilt, just to twist me into his spiral. But either way, every winter when the snow piles high and the nights stretch long, I hear his voice again. "You remember more than you want to, don't you?" And I still don't know how to answer. Because evil doesn't always come from strangers or monsters. It seeps from people we love, people we trust, until you can't tell where their darkness ends and yours begins. Maybe the worst horror isn't what someone does to you. It's what they convince you you've done yourself. I'd always been the kind of kid who chased the thrill. In Ravenwood, Oregon, there wasn't much else to do. The town was small, sleepy, and always wrapped in mist that made it hard to tell where the real ended and imagination began. My best friend Clive and I thrived on boredom and bad ideas. We spent endless afternoons leaping off docks into freezing water, sneaking into old lumber mills, daring each other to push just a little further each time. If someone told us don't, it sounded like a challenge. By spring of 2011, we were 17, too young to know better, too old to be scared of anything. Everyone else was tangled in sports, homework, or part-time jobs. But Clive and I wanted something that made us feel alive again. That's when the Hawthorne estate caught our attention. The mansion sat at the forest's edge like a rotting crown. Its rusted iron gates dangled from one hinge, vines crawling up the cracked stone walls. People in town still whispered about the Hawthornes, a rich family that had vanished decades ago. Some said Old Man Hawthorne went mad. Others said he disappeared into the woods and never came back. No one had seen a light in that house for as long as anyone could remember. Naturally, that made it irresistible. We spent a week hyping ourselves up. I won't lie. Half the thrill was just testing ourselves, seeing if we could walk into something that scared everyone else. Clive liked the rush but always wanted a safety net. Me, I didn't believe in those. "You're actually doing this tonight?" Clive asked as we sat in my old Honda a few blocks away, the windshield fogged with our breath. Outside, the air smelled like wet pine and chimney smoke. "I'm not letting you chicken out now," I said, grinning. "It's just a house, man. Old dusty, probably full of rats and broken crap. That's it." He flipped his flashlight in his hands, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, rats and dust. Perfect Saturday night activity." By 11:45, we were standing at the gates. When I pushed, the metal shrieked like something alive dragging against stone. The sound echoed through the still night. As we walked up the overgrown path, every step cracked branches beneath our boots, each one sounding like footsteps that didn't belong to us. My flashlight cut across the mansion's facade, warped shutters, blistered paint, and black windows staring back like empty sockets. My pulse thudded hard, part fear, part excitement. Inside, the air was thick, damp, decaying wood, a hint of metal, maybe blood, maybe rust. Our footsteps echoed off marble floors buried in dust. The chandelier above us swayed slightly, its crystals clicking in the draft. Cobwebs clung to our sleeves as we moved deeper in. I ran my hand over the railing of the grand staircase. Flakes of white paint came off like old skin. Clive's whisper broke the silence. "This place is massive." "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding strange in the hollow room. "Empty too," just like they said. We crept through the hallways, opening doors to rooms full of broken furniture, yellowed wallpaper, stacks of old newspapers. That's when we heard it, a whisper, so faint at first, curling through the air like smoke. We both froze, heads turning at the same time. "Another, did you hear that?" Clive murmured. I nodded slowly, my stomach tightening. The sound came again, louder this time, more deliberate. Words taking shape inside the static of the house. "Don't leave." It didn't hit like a scream would. It crept in quietly, a chill that crawled from the back of my neck down my spine. I tried to reason with myself. Houses make sounds, air moves, floors settle. I even said it out loud, more for me than him. "It's just the wind." "Gotta be." Clive's flashlight jittered across the walls. "No," he said, shaking his head. "That wasn't wind. Someone said something. I heard it." His voice cracked near the end. I forced a laugh that didn't sound like me. "Come on, let's check the library. Probably some busted vent or..." Before I could finish, a cold draft swept down the hall, wrapping around us. The whispers came again, closer, weaving between the gusts. Clive stopped mid-step, eyes unfocused. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't catch. "Clive?" I stepped up beside him, laying a hand on his shoulder. His skin was clammy. I squeezed gently. "Hey man, you good?" He blinked hard, then shook his head like shaking off a bad dream. "It's nothing," he mumbled, but his voice was hollow, thin. I met his eyes, and for the first time since we were kids jumping off docks, I saw real fear there. The kind that doesn't go away when the adrenaline does. We tried the front door. It wouldn't move, not stuck, but sealed like the house itself refused to let us go. Panic rose fast, clawing up my chest. "What the hell?" I muttered, slamming my shoulder against the wood. It shuddered but didn't give. The wind outside howled through the cracks and the hinges groaned like something alive holding tight. Clive's grip tightened around my arm. "There, did you see that?" I turned toward where he pointed. At the far end of the hall, the shadows bent in ways they shouldn't. For a second, I thought my light was flickering, but no, it was moving. Someone was gliding toward us, slow and soundless, shape-shifting with the darkness. "We're leaving." "Now," I hissed. Clive didn't argue. We bolted down the side corridor, shoving through debris and half-rotten doors until one finally burst open. The cold night air hit us like a slap. Outside, everything felt wrong. Too thick, too sharp, as if the atmosphere itself didn't want us breathing it. Clive leaned against the gate, gasping. I don't remember what happened in there," he said between ragged breaths. I couldn't answer. The memory was already splintering into fragments, the whispers wrapping around my ears, that crawling sensation on my neck like unseen hands tracing my skin. Even now, decades later, I can still feel how alive that house was. Aware. Hungry. The next morning, fear gave way to something worse. Curiosity. I needed to understand. Clive wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't even meet my eyes, but I couldn't let it go. I spent hours combing through what little the library held about the Hawthorne estate. The records were thin. The family had vanished in 1949. No sale, no obituary, no explanation. People filled the silence with folklore, curses, rituals, missing travelers. "I don't care what anyone says," I told Clive one afternoon at the diner, trying to sound casual while my heart raced. "There's a logical explanation. Houses make noise. Light plays tricks. People exaggerate." Clive didn't even touch his food. He looked up, face pale, voice flat. "You don't get it, man. That house doesn't make noise, it listens. It wants you there. It knows when you're afraid." I forced a laugh, but it came out strained. "You sound like one of those ghost tour guys." He didn't laugh back. Later that week, we drove past the estate again. The fog clung low and the gates moaned in the wind. I told myself not to look, but I did, and in one of the cracked upper windows something moved. A slow, deliberate shift like someone pulling back from view. My chest tightened. For the first time, I considered letting it all go. But curiosity doesn't let go easily. Over the next few months, I dug deeper. Archives, old newspapers, whispered interviews with townsfolk who remembered things they'd rather forget. There were rumors of a fortune hidden somewhere inside, a sealed safe, legal documents that vanished with the family, and always at the edge of the stories, mention of a caretaker who'd gone missing a year before the Hawthorns disappeared. No body, no trace. By late summer, my obsession had turned into resolve. I needed answers. "We go back," I told Clive one night, spreading old blueprints across my kitchen table. He just stared. "You're serious? After what we saw?" "I'm not going in blind this time," I said. "We'll be prepared, cameras, gloves, ropes. We'll figure out what's really there." He looked away, jaw clenched. "You're out of your damn mind." But he still showed up. We reached the mansion just after midnight. The forest around it was wet and quiet, every sound swallowed by mist. The house stood waiting, darker than before, almost harsh. Inside, the air was thick with decay. Every breath tasted of mold and something metallic. We moved carefully, boots crunching over plaster. The whispers started before we reached the staircase. Softer this time, persistent like a lullaby sung through walls. Clive froze. "You hear it again?" I nodded. "Keep moving." He didn't. "It's saying something." "Don't listen," I said. But even as I said it, I did. We reached the library, shelves half collapsed, books swollen from damp. One diary lay open on a warped desk, its pages smeared but legible enough. It belonged to the youngest Hawthorne child. Most entries were mundane, school lessons, piano practice until the last few weeks. They whisper to me at night. They sound like us. They want us to stay. The final line was a shaky scrawl. "They are coming. I can't leave." That was when the whispers swelled, circling us like a tide. I realized then this wasn't about ghosts. It wasn't about some trapped soul or curse. The house itself was alive, fed by fear, by fascination. It grew stronger the more we wanted to understand it. Clive's flashlight flickered. "We need to go," he breathed. I didn't argue this time. We ran, following the familiar creaks and cracks until the door finally gave. When we burst into the cold air, it was like breaking through water after drowning. We didn't speak on the drive back. Didn't even turn on the radio. There was nothing to say. We never returned after that. The cameras stayed in storage. The film untouched. The mansion still stands, sagging deeper into the woods each year. No one lives there, no one dares. Ravenwood remains as it's always been. Quiet, fog-bound, pretending to forget. Sometimes when I walk near those woods, I swear I can hear it again. The faint, familiar whisper weaving through the wind. Don't leave. And I've learned to listen, not to answer. Not to go back, but to remember that curiosity, no matter how thrilling, can open doors that were never meant for us. Some boundaries aren't there to keep things out. They're there to keep them in. It was the summer of 1999 in Portsmouth, Maine, and the night smelled like salt, gasoline, and that faint fishy tang from the harbor that always clung to the air. I was 15, reckless, sleepless, always running on nerves and noise, and too restless to stay inside. Caleb lived 2 streets over, the kind of kid who made lists for everything, even snacks for a movie night. But even he couldn't resist when I said, "Let's sneak out." Our meeting spot was the cracked asphalt by the Harbor View docks, skateboards under our arms, the world around us half asleep. We weren't chasing anything specific, just trying to get away from what waited at home. My dad had walked out that spring, leaving behind a quiet that made the walls feel hollow. Caleb's parents had stopped talking altogether. Out there under flickering streetlights and the whine of the sea wind, we felt like kings of a city that didn't care we existed. We pushed off down the streets, our wheels clattering over pavement seams. The sound mixed with my Walkman hissing out a distorted guitar riff and our laughter echoing off empty storefronts. We joked about crushes, about the weird stuff our siblings said, about whether the fireworks at Prescott Park would be worth sneaking into again. But as we rolled toward the piers, something changed. The air thickened. The laughter felt out of place. Up ahead, near the last dock light, I saw them. 5 men in dark fisherman coats. They stood shoulder to shoulder, motionless, shaved heads catching the yellow glow. For a second, I thought maybe they were just fishermen finishing up late. Then one lifted his hand, slow, deliberate, and gestured for us to come closer. "Don't look," Caleb hissed, gripping my sleeve. "Just go, man." But I didn't move. My chest went tight. A voice drifted from the shadows, low and ragged. "Over here." Poison, that broke me. We kicked off, wheels hammering against the pavement, tearing through the night toward the only light we could see, a 24-hour laundromat on Brigg Street. Inside, the air was thick with detergent and humidity. The dryers rumbled and clicked, half-empty drums spinning like lazy hearts. No clerk, no customers, just us and the hum of machines. We ducked behind the counter, gasping, sweat sticking to our shirts. Caleb mouthed, "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. The bell above the door jingled. They'd followed. The 5 men entered silently, moving like they'd rehearsed it. One dragged his fingers across the glass of a washer, whispering something under his breath. It wasn't English. It sounded like prayer or threat. Then Caleb's pager buzzed, loud. All 5 heads turned in perfect sync. The sound died in my throat. One of them stepped forward. His hand shot out, gripping my arm, and I felt cold steel brush my skin. Then sirens, a wailing crescendo cutting through the night. Red and blue light slashed through the laundromat windows. In an instant, the men scattered, slipping out a side door so fast it was like they melted into the dark. We stayed crouched there until the cops burst in, 2 of them, out of breath, hands on their guns. They asked what happened, but I could barely form words. My palms were scraped raw. My pulse wouldn't slow. Later, the police told us those men were connected to kidnappings across Vermont and New Hampshire, kids gone missing near ports and small towns like ours. I remember sitting on Caleb's porch afterward, the 2 of us wrapped in silence, realizing how close we'd come, how thin the line really was between ordinary life and danger. The days after blurred together. Even in daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed longer, stretching across the pavement like they knew where I was going. Caleb and I avoided the docks, the laundromat, the side streets that once felt like ours. Sleep became impossible. Every sound, a creak, a whisper of wind sent me bolt upright. When I tried to tell my mom, the words came out wrong. "It's nothing," I ended up saying. She just looked tired and nodded. So I kept it to myself. School wasn't safe either. Crowded hallways, buzzing fluorescent lights, the smell of pencil shavings, it all felt unreal. My mind kept replaying that night. The reflection of bald heads under sodium light, the sound of boots on tile, the knife against my arm. I'd catch myself flinching at nothing. Caleb would too. One afternoon, walking home from the harbor, Caleb finally spoke what we were both thinking. "You think they'll come back?" His voice cracked like it hurt to ask. "I don't know," I said. "They vanished like ghosts." He nodded, eyes on the ground. "If they do, we won't be alone," I said, but neither of us believed it. The air was too still, the sun too bright to feel safe. That summer dragged on, every errand charged with quiet panic. I couldn't even go to the corner store without scanning reflections in the windows. My mom begged me to stay inside. I couldn't. The walls made it worse. I wanted things to feel normal again, even if normal didn't exist anymore. By mid-July, cops came by our houses more than once, taking statements, fingerprints, photos. They said the kidnappers moved fast, picking kids whose parents were distracted. I remember the way that made my stomach twist, how exposed it made me feel. Caleb and I built a kind of routine after that. We checked the docks before we left home. We only walked at night if we stayed near crowds. We moved in pairs, even to the gas station. But it didn't help much. I still felt eyes on me, even in broad daylight. Once, at the movie theater parking lot, I saw a man standing by the lamppost in a long coat. His bald head gleamed under the sun. I blinked, and he was gone. We tried talking about it at school, but no one believed us. "Sounds like a summer ghost story," someone joked. But it wasn't funny. Caleb and I knew the sound of panic too well. We'd felt that freeze, that instinct to run that came from something primal. By August, waiting for it to happen again was worse than the night itself. We started noticing things. The docks were empty at odd times. The laundromat lights flickered on even when it looked closed. And the cops always showed up just a few minutes too late. Caleb thought we should tell someone. Maybe the harbor master or hell, anyone. "Don't," I said. We were on my garage roof that night, legs dangling, boards resting beside us. Crickets chirped somewhere in the dark. We survived because we didn't confront them, I said. If we start digging or talking, if we make noise, they'll notice. And next time we won't get lucky. He didn't argue, but he didn't disagree either. We just sat there in silence, staring out at the harbor lights trembling on the black water, both of us pretending we didn't already know we'd never really escaped. Caleb let out a long breath, his voice low but steady. We can't just ignore it, man. They could have grabbed us that night. What if they try again? What if it's someone else next time? He was right. Ignoring it didn't make it less real, so we started keeping track of everything. Every strange figure near the docks, every cold draft that came from nowhere, every faint whisper that made our skin crawl. We wrote it all down. By the end of August, our notebooks were messy patchworks of paranoia and gut feeling, sketches of faces, fragments of overheard words, times and places circled in pen. When the news broke that more kidnappings had happened in nearby towns, it hit me like a punch. Seeing those headlines in black print, 2 missing in Rye, teen abducted in Hampton, made my stomach twist, but also, it confirmed we hadn't imagined it. We'd been right to be scared. One evening, just before sunset, we were sitting by the pier, boards resting against the rail, when a man approached us. He looked like he'd been living out of his coat for weeks, graying beard, wrinkled eyes, sleeves frayed at the cuffs. He held a folder tight under his arm like it was something sacred. "You boys saw them, didn't you?" he said quietly. We froze. Caleb blinked. "Saw who?" "The men," he whispered. "The ones taking kids? I've been following their trail for months. You need to stay away from here, understand? Far away, until this is over." He glanced over his shoulder, eyes darting toward the water like he expected to see someone there. Then he set the folder on the ground beside us and walked off without another word. Inside were photos, police clippings, maps marked in red ink. Every point on that map told the same story. Towns just like ours, docks just like these. We traced one line with shaking fingers and realized one of the marks sat barely a mile from our neighborhood. That night we stayed up on my porch flipping through the pages until the first hint of dawn crept over the rooftops. Every page felt like proof of how close we'd come to being another name on a missing poster. Summer bled into fall, and then school began again. The kidnappers, or whatever they were, just disappeared. The cops stopped visiting. The newspaper stopped printing updates. The fear didn't leave overnight, but it started to settle like dust after a storm. Maybe they'd been caught. Maybe they moved on. No one ever said for sure. But Caleb and I were different. We didn't go looking for trouble anymore. We trusted our instincts. If something felt wrong, we left. The docks, once our kingdom, became something else entirely. A place you watched from a distance. The laundromat, too. It stood there quiet. A ghost of that night. A reminder that sometimes surviving has nothing to do with strength and everything to do with luck. After that summer, I started noticing things I used to miss. The way people looked at each other. The weight in someone's tone. How the wind could change right before something bad happened. My world had edges now, sharper ones. Childhood had stretched too thin to fit anymore. Caleb and I stayed friends, but the tone between us shifted. We still hung out, wrote our boards, watched dumb movies. But the laughter didn't come as easily. Every adventure carried a caution we didn't have before. Every turn down a dark street came with a glance over the shoulder. We were older, not in years, but in the way fear had rewritten us. Even now, decades later, I can still smell that summer. The mix of salt and gasoline, the echo of wheels against the dock, the faint hum of danger that never really left. I can still see the flash of red and blue against the laundromat glass, the men's silhouettes dissolving into the dark, the press of Caleb's shoulder against mine when we realized we were still alive. That night taught me something school never could. Bravery isn't charging forward. It's knowing when to freeze, when to run, when to listen to the part of you that screams don't. Curiosity is just courage without caution, and that's what almost got us killed. Whenever I pass a laundromat now, I can't help but slow down. I glance at the windows, half expecting to see a reflection that doesn't belong. Sometimes I swear I hear that sound again. The drag of nails across glass, the whisper that turned the night cold. Fear used to feel like weakness to me. Now I see it for what it is, a warning, a teacher. It's the voice that says, pay attention, Because life is fragile and unpredictable, and not everyone who smiles means well. Courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about understanding the weight of fear and choosing to move carefully anyway. And maybe, just maybe, that's what saved us. I was 20 that fall, 2015, still fumbling my way through who I was supposed to be. I wasn't the partying type, never had been. While most people on campus were chasing noise and beer and bad decisions, I spent my nights hunched over my laptop in the glow of my desk lamp, editing photos. Abandoned barns, rusted silos, graveyards no one visited anymore. That was my thing, capturing what everyone else ignored, the forgotten edges of the world. My best friend Noah was everything I wasn't. Loud, magnetic, theatrical to his bones. If I was shadow, he was spotlight. Theater was his life, and somehow he turned every moment into a performance. Ordering coffee, a monologue, walking across the quad, a scene. He didn't just want to live life, he wanted to stage it. He's the one who found the Craigslist post. He slid his phone across the cafeteria table one chilly October afternoon, grinning like a kid about to dare me into trouble. "Dude, look at this," he said. The post was short. No photos, just a single line. "Genuine demonstrations of impossible illusions. No fee, inquire at the Holloway estate." I frowned. Sounds like some weird LARP thing. "Exactly," Noah said, eyes glinting. "Which means it'll be hilarious. Worst case, some old guy doing bad card tricks. Best case, we catch something freaky on video and go viral." The internet back then was obsessed with fake haunted house videos, night vision screams, shaky cameras, jump scares that always felt staged. I wasn't into it. But something about that post tugged at me. Maybe it was the word impossible. Maybe I wanted a new shot for my portfolio. "You're serious?" I asked. "You want to drive out to some creepy house because of a Craigslist ad?" "That's exactly what I want," he said, leaning back smugly. "And you're bringing your camera." By Saturday, I'd somehow agreed. We borrowed his sister's beat-up Civic, the one that rattled every time we hit 60. The directions led us out of Charleston, past sagging Halloween decorations and quiet cul-de-sacs, then into the kind of countryside where radio stations faded to static. Bare trees lined the road like ribs. Then we saw it, the Holloway estate. It looked like something I'd have photographed, a decaying Victorian crouched behind an iron gate, its siding peeled raw by time. Some of the windows were boarded up, others open like blind eyes. A rusted crest was welded into the gate's bars, half worn away. "This is perfect," Noah whispered, almost reverent. To him, it was theater set dressing. To me, it felt like trespassing on a grave. The gate wasn't even locked. It moaned when we pushed it open, gravel crunching beneath our sneakers as we walked the weed-choked path. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, part fear, part thrill. The front door creaked open before we even knocked. The smell hit first. Mildew, damp wood and something sharp underneath, like pennies soaked in water. A tall man stood in the shadows of the hall. He was impossibly thin, dressed in a navy tailcoat that might have been elegant 50 years ago. His voice was low and measured, each word shaped like it mattered. "Welcome to the Holloway estate," he said. "I am Professor Vale." I looked at Noah, his grin widened. "Hell yes," he whispered. "This is going to be amazing." I wanted to believe him, but as Vale stepped aside, motioning for us to enter, something cold and heavy settled in my gut. Whatever this was, it wasn't a harmless act. He led us down a narrow hall into what must have been the parlor. The air was thick, the wallpaper sagging off the walls. The chandelier above us hung unevenly, dust catching the faint light. But in the center of the room, a single table stood, perfectly arranged, too deliberate. On it lay a deck of hand-painted cards. Not paper, wood thin and warped. Symbols carved and filled with black and crimson pigment. The strokes rough like gouges. None looked familiar. "Each of you must choose," Vale said softly, hands clasped behind his back. Noah didn't hesitate. He grabbed one with a jagged crown painted on it, the points like thorns. Vale's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. He reached beneath the table and brought out a rusted meat hook. Before we could react, he slammed it into the wood, crack inches from Noah's hand. Noah flinched back, swearing. "Jesus, man." Vale's voice dropped. "That," he whispered, "is the trick." We stood frozen. For a second, I thought maybe that was it. The big scare, some weird theater stunt. Noah let out a nervous laugh, rubbing his wrist. "Okay," he said, "creepy, but good showmanship." "You got me." Vale turned to me. "And you?" Every instinct told me to walk out. But Noah's eyes were on me, waiting, daring. And maybe I wanted to prove something, to him, to myself. I reached out and picked a card. It showed a hollow eye, dark and empty. Vale's grin widened. Without a word, he disappeared into the next room. Noah leaned close. "Okay, this dude's committed," he whispered. I could hear the excitement in his voice, but it didn't match the tightness in my chest. When Vale came back, he carried a gas lantern. The flame inside wasn't upright. It leaned like something invisible was pulling it sideways. Noah's laugh broke off mid-breath. "Okay, what the hell?" "How did you—" I shook my head. There were no wires, no wind. Just that wrong, impossible flame hissing softly inside the glass. Then I realized the door behind us was shut. I turned, tried the knob. It didn't budge. My pulse stuttered. "Hey," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "What's going on?" He didn't answer. His eyes just glinted in the lantern's flickering light as he set it on the table. The flame still leaned sideways, straining against nothing. Noah's voice broke the silence. "I think we should leave." We both turned for the door. It didn't open. Panic flickered through me as we scrambled through the house. First the kitchen, then the hall. The back door was nailed shut, boards crossed like a warning. The windows were sealed with heavy curtains stapled into the frames. Even the side hallway had furniture piled against it, blocking the way. "This is insane," I whispered, pulling at a nailed window frame until my palms stung. Noah tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "Okay, so this is what, immersive theater? That's gotta be what this is, right?" He didn't sound like he believed it. When we stumbled back into the parlor, Vale was waiting. He held a cracked smartphone in one pale hand, the screen glowing cold against his skin. Without a word, he tapped play. The video was shaky, filmed in a dim basement. A man sat tied to a chair, shirtless, his eyes wild and pleading. And then, Vale stepped into the frame. His calm, deliberate voice narrated as he pressed nails through the man's palms one by one, like he was teaching a class. I gagged and turned away, bile burning the back of my throat. Noah's face went rigid. The cocky energy drained out of him completely. "You're sick," he hissed. Vale tilted his head, his tone almost patient. "The audience demands authenticity." That's when Noah snapped. He grabbed my camera bag, yanked out my DSLR, and swung it like a weapon. The body of the camera cracked against Vale's temple with a dull thud. Blood trickled down his face, but the expression he wore, it wasn't pain. It was delight. He smiled wider and lifted the meat hook. "Run!" I shouted. We tore through the halls, yanking at every door, slamming into blocked exits. The house was a maze of dead ends, like it had been designed to hold its prey. My lungs burned. The air reeked of dust and metal. Vale's boots dragged across the floorboards behind us, the hooks scraping, echoing. And then, sirens. The faint rise and fall of them outside growing louder. Red and blue light flashed through the cracks in the boarded windows. Vale froze mid-step. His face twisted into something feral, not human. He hissed, low and guttural, words that didn't sound like any language I knew, and then he was gone. Slipped back into the dark behind the stairwell, as if the shadows swallowed him whole. The front door burst open a moment later. Flashlights cut through the gloom. "Hands up! Move!" Someone shouted. A police officer grabbed me, half dragging me out onto the gravel drive. Cold air hit my face and I collapsed onto my knees. My legs felt like water. Noah stumbled beside me, gasping. They found the basement later. Chains bolted to the walls. Blood on the planks. Signs of a struggle. But Vale was gone, vanished like smoke. At the station, I gave my statement. So did Noah. He tried to joke to keep his hands from shaking, but his laugh sounded wrong, like something cracked. Weeks later, a detective called my dorm. Professor Vale, if that was even his name, was wanted in connection with at least 4 disappearances across West Virginia. The Holloway estate was condemned, the grounds fenced off, but Vale himself was still missing. Nothing felt normal after that. Every time I lifted my camera, I half expected to see his reflection in the lens. standing behind me, smiling that same blood-slick smile. Noah quit theater. He told everyone he was just refocusing, but I knew. He couldn't pretend anymore. After you've looked a real monster in the eye, the stage feels small. My photos changed too. I stopped chasing decay for beauty's sake. Every abandoned place felt dangerous now, like it remembered the people who'd gone missing. Sometimes when my dorm was quiet, I could swear I heard it, the faint scrape of metal on wood like that hook dragging across the table. We made it out, but not clean, not whole. Curiosity can open doors better left closed. Not every invitation is a performance, and not every performer stops when the curtain falls. Sometimes the only difference between surviving and vanishing is the moment you finally listen to your gut and walk away. When I think back to that November, it's not the snow I remember first, or the lodge, or even the storm. It's the silence. Not the kind you find in a library or during an exam, but a deeper, weightier kind, like the mountains themselves had swallowed every sound and were holding it hostage. That fall, I'd been restless in a way I couldn't name. My photography was flat, work deadlines blurred together, and my apartment in Calgary felt more like a storage unit than a home. I'd started to feel like I was suffocating in my own routines. So when Rowan suggested a getaway, a real one, he'd said, I didn't hesitate. He'd found an old hunting lodge tucked deep in the Rockies, over 100 years old but still standing. Completely off-grid, he said, eyes gleaming. The photos looked straight out of a faded postcard, all rough-hewn beams and stone chimneys swallowed by pine. The thought of snow-dusted peaks and empty landscapes was enough to make me breathe again. Theo agreed instantly, claiming he'd cook mountain feasts out of whatever we could cram into the SUV. Sienna took longer. She chewed at her lip like she always did when she was anxious. I don't know, she murmured, eyes darting between us. Places like that, they get in your head. But loyalty was her default, and she finally sighed. Fine, just don't blame me if we get snowed in. The drive started lighthearted. Music blared, windows fogged with laughter, and Theo kept trying to harmonize badly with whatever song was playing. But the farther we climbed into the mountains, the quieter things got. The highway narrowed into serpentine roads hemmed by drifts of white. Pines rose in jagged ranks on either side, black and skeletal against the bruised sky. By the time the lodge came into view, a hulking silhouette crouched above the tree line. The sun was gone. It was bigger than I'd imagined. A brooding mix of timber and stone with a roof that sagged in the middle like an old man's spine. The windows were unlit, glass dull and empty. Rowan was practically vibrating, rambling about preserved craftsmanship and pre-war architecture. I just stepped out into the freezing air and raised my camera, catching the lodge against a blood-orange horizon. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke, dust, and time. The furniture was heavy, the kind that creaked when you brushed past it. Quilts faded to near gray hung over chairs, and our footsteps echoed in the wide hall. We each picked a room upstairs. Mine had wallpaper peeling in one corner and a window that rattled when the wind blew. Theo managed to coax a fire to life, the flames casting restless shadows across the beams. We cooked pasta that was too salty but warm, played cards at the long wooden table, and tried to ignore the storm clawing at the windows. It should have felt cozy, safe, but as I leaned toward the glass, watching snow whip itself into spirals, I froze. There, between two pines, a figure stood, still upright, half swallowed by the dark. My breath hitched. Someone's out there, I whispered. Rowan snorted, tossing a card down. You've been staring through that camera too long. You're seeing ghosts in your own lens. Theo chuckled. Sienna forced a laugh, and I tried to smile, but my stomach was already twisting. That silhouette, it hadn't moved. Not once, too still to be human. Too solid to be imagination. That was our first night. The first time the silence seemed to press too close, like the air itself was listening. The first time I thought maybe this trip had been a mistake. By morning, the world outside was nothing but white. The storm had buried the trees halfway up their trunks, and even the air seemed frozen. We gathered in the kitchen, cradling mugs of instant coffee that smelled faintly like cardboard. Theo cursed when the generator sputtered out, leaving us in the flicker of the dying fire. It's fine, he said, forcing cheer. We've got food, firewood, and good company. Worst case, we play Monopoly till spring, but the tension started creeping in anyway. Rowan insisted on proper firewood stacking techniques. Theo rolled his eyes. Sienna stayed near me, chewing her lip until it bled. "Something's wrong," she whispered. I didn't sleep. I heard footsteps outside, just pacing. Her voice cracked on the last word. I wanted to reassure her, but the dark smudges under her eyes told me she wasn't inventing it. That night, the wind sounded different, lower, almost like it carried voices in its throat. We tried to laugh it off, playing cards again, but my gaze kept drifting to the windows. The glass seemed to breathe with the wind, flexing, whispering. Sometime after midnight, I jolted awake. The storm had stopped. No wind, no creaks, no sound at all. The silence was wrong, thick and unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. I reached over. Sienna's bed was empty. A bolt of panic went through me. I threw on my jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and crept downstairs. The lodge was a maze of black shapes and half-burned embers, the smell of smoke and cold wood filling my nose. The floorboards complained softly under my weight. "Sienna?" My voice barely broke the air. No answer. I swung the beam across the room, trembling slightly. The walls, the chairs, the cold glow of ash in the fireplace. Everything looked too still. My breath fogged and vanished before my eyes. I called her name again, quieter this time. The silence swallowed it whole. I yanked open the front door. Snow gusted in, stinging my face and throat with cold. Through the blur of white, a figure stumbled out of the trees, arms limp, steps uncertain. My heart slammed as I recognized her. Sienna! She collapsed against me, her body shockingly cold, her hair stiff with frost. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "There's someone watching us." Standing out there, just watching. Her voice was hoarse, raw, like it had scraped its way out of her throat. I dragged her inside, shutting the door against the wind. She shook violently, refusing the blanket I threw over her shoulders. Rowan crouched beside us, trying for calm, though his voice wavered. "You're freezing, Sienna. No one's out there. It's just the storm messing with you." But his eyes didn't match his words. He looked toward the window more than once. That was the second night. The night fear started to chew through us like rot. By dawn, the firewood was running low and the generator had sputtered out sometime before sunrise. Theo volunteered to check it, tugging on his boots. "I'll be quick," he said with forced cheer. "If I'm not back in 10, assume I froze and make me a statue." He smiled, but his shoulders were tight, his humor brittle. An hour passed. Then 2. Rowan's patience cracked. "I'll get him," he muttered, yanking on his coat. Probably tinkering like an idiot again. But neither of them came back. The lodge grew cavernous with just Sienna and me inside. The wind pressed against the walls, whispering like someone circling the building. Sienna sat by the fire, wringing her hands until her knuckles turned white. "They're messing with us," she hissed. "Or maybe it's him, the man I saw. Don't you see? He's hunting us." Her words crawled under my skin, coiling tight. Every groan of wood made me flinch. Every flicker of shadow looked like movement. When night fell again, we barricaded ourselves in the kitchen, knives clenched tight. The air between us was heavy, charged with something uglier than fear. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't trust me either. "You think it's me, don't you?" she asked, voice trembling. I gripped the knife harder. "Tell me the truth, Sienna." Her face twisted, her voice breaking into a scream. "I didn't touch them." The sound ripped through the silence like a tear in the world. We circled each other, wild-eyed, breathing hard, blades raised. The fire threw our shadows huge across the walls. I don't remember deciding. Just the movement, the lunge, the sudden warmth on my hands, and Sienna's gasp cutting through the air. She fell against me, the knife still buried deep. Blood spread quickly, dark against the floorboards. Her eyes locked on mine, wide and glassy. "You weren't supposed to remember," she whispered. My stomach twisted. "What?" But she was already gone. Then the memories flooded in, shards of truth slicing through my skull. The drive up alone in the SUV. The lodge echoing as I'd hauled in my gear. The laughter by the fire. Just my own voice bouncing back from the walls. Rowan's careful optimism. Theo's jokes, Sienna's shaking hands, they were fragments. Fractures of me, splintered into people so I wouldn't have to feel alone. I stumbled from room to room, calling their names into the emptiness. Only silence answered. Their beds were still made. Their clothes never unpacked. The knife slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor, streaked with my own blood. It was me. It had always been me. Days blurred together. Snow sealed the lodge from the world outside. I stopped checking the windows. I sat by the fireplace instead, staring into the flames until they blurred. Sometimes I swore I heard Theo humming in the next room, or Rowan's footsteps pacing upstairs. Sometimes I caught a flash of Sienna's hair at the edge of my vision. But when I turned, there was nothing. Only cold and dust. When the storm finally broke, the silence thickened again, heavier than before. Weeks later, rescuers found me slumped in the kitchen, half-starved, murmuring to voices that weren't there. They said I'd rented the lodge alone. No record of my friends. No footprints but mine in the snow. Maybe they're right. Maybe the storm took them, or maybe they never existed at all. What I know is this: when the night grows still enough, I still hear them. Their laughter, their footsteps, their whispers threading through the dark. Isolation doesn't always come from the world outside. Sometimes it's born inside us in the cracks we refuse to see. And the real horror isn't the storm or the shadows beyond the glass. It's the darkness that waits quietly within, patient, until it convinces us that we were never alone. I still remember the smell of salt that September evening in 2019. It clung to my jacket like something alive, as if the Atlantic itself had reached into Seabrook, Maine, a sleepy coastal town where nothing much ever happened and where the nights seemed to hum with the sound of the sea. I was 13, nervous about starting a new school but trying to seem excited, especially when Harper Lane invited me over for a sleepover at her family's house. It sat high on the cliffs, gray shingles curling like old bark, the driveway cracked and half swallowed by weeds. The air was damp, sharp with seaweed and salt. When I stepped out of the car, I could hear gulls somewhere in the distance and the dull roar of the tide. Rowan came with me, of course. She'd been my best friend since 3rd grade. Organized, cautious, always over-prepared. She carried a duffel that looked like it could sustain her through a blizzard. My mom watched us climb the porch steps, the boards whining under our sneakers. "Stick together, Callie," she said. "Check in, trust your instincts, and remember, Harper's family is nice, but don't wander off." I smiled, doing my best not to roll my eyes. "Got it, Mom." Inside, the house smelled of old wood and cardboard, like the attic of a forgotten summer home. Half-unpacked boxes lined the walls, casting tall, crooked shadows. Harper bounded through them with restless energy, laughing, snapping pictures with her instant camera. "Sorry about the mess," she said, grinning. "We're still unpacking. Mom says the house is full of character. Translation, it's haunted." Rowan laughed nervously. "Please don't say that before bed." We spent the evening eating greasy pizza from the diner, blasting pop songs and playing Truth or Dare in the cluttered living room. Harper's laughter filled the space like light. Rowan and I exchanged quiet glances now and then. Little reminders to stay cautious, but there wasn't much to be afraid of. Not yet. Around 11, Harper bounced to her feet. "Let's go for a walk. The cliff trail looks amazing at night." Rowan frowned. "Now it's dark. My mom won't care," Harper said. "She lets me go down there all the time. Come on, it's just a few minutes." Outside, the night hit cold and clean. The air smelled sharp, metallic almost, the kind of cold that bit the inside of your nose. The wind carried the crash of waves, steady and distant. Our flashlight sliced through the darkness, catching the sway of pine branches and glints of wet rock. Rowan walked close beside me, her breath quick, the beam in her hand shaking slightly. "This is kind of creepy," she muttered. "It's fine," Harper said, half smiling. "You'll love the view." At first I did. The forest opened to glimpses of the ocean far below, black and endless. Harper darted ahead, crouching to take pictures of moss-covered stones, her flash popping like lightning. But after a while, something in the air changed. The sound of the sea grew distant, muffled. I couldn't tell why, but the hairs on my arms lifted. That's when I saw him. A shape up ahead on the path, tall, still, hooded. My stomach twisted. I leaned toward Rowan, whispering, "He's following us." She froze, light trembling in her grip. "What, who?" The figure moved again, just enough for the beam to catch the glint of something metallic, a knife or something like it. And then the smell hit, rot wet and sour, thick enough to make me gag. "Run," Rowan breathed. We bolted. Branches tore at our sleeves as we stumbled through the dark, Harper shouting somewhere behind us. The crunch of our shoes on gravel mixed with the distant roar of waves. By the time we reached the porch, my lungs burned. We slammed the door shut, twisting the lock until it clicked. No one wanted to wake Harper's parents. We didn't even speak for a moment, just stood there listening to the wind rattle the windows. My hands shook. Every sound in the house, every pop of wood, every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps approaching. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Maybe just someone hiking late, maybe. But the smell clung to me, thick and sour, and deep down I knew better. Back in the living room, the half-eaten pizza had gone cold. Rowan's hands trembled as she fiddled with her flashlight. Harper was pale, biting her thumbnail. "You guys sure it wasn't a trick of the light?" she whispered. I tried to sound calm. Maybe, I don't know. But he was holding something. No one slept. By 2 a.m., Harper shoved a DVD into the player, desperate to fill the silence. The horror movie flickered across the room, shadows dancing on the walls. The house creaked like it was breathing. I sat near the window, the glass cold against my arm, staring out toward the cliffs. The trees swayed in the moonlight, and every now and then I swore I saw movement between them. Rowan refused to look that way. "The shadows are wrong," she whispered. "They're moving the wrong way." I didn't argue. I just kept watching, waiting for another glint of metal in the dark. An hour later, my flashlight cut through the dark and caught something moving outside. For a second I thought it was a trick of the wind, but then I saw him. A shirtless, pale man slipping between the pines, gone almost as soon as my light touched him. "Did you see that?" Harper whispered, her voice brittle and small. Her laugh faltered halfway out of her throat and died. None of us moved. The air felt suddenly heavier, pressing down on us. I could hear Rowan breathing fast beside me, the house creaking like it was holding its own breath. My mind scrambled for logic, maybe a lost hiker, maybe a dream, but the chill crawling up my arm said otherwise. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees, as though something outside had dragged the cold in with it. At 4:30 a.m., a single knock echoed through the house, sharp, hollow. My stomach twisted. Harper jolted upright, her eyes wide in the dim glow of the TV. "Don't," Rowan hissed when I stood. But I couldn't help it. I crept toward the front door, each floorboard groaning underfoot. My heart hammered as I pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. Just darkness. Then the smell hit, thick and foul, the same rot we'd smelled in the woods. It seeped through the cracks, sour and metallic, clinging to my throat. Somewhere deeper in the house, footsteps creaked, slow, deliberate, moving down the hallway. Harper's dad appeared seconds later, his face pale and tight, a shotgun gripped in both hands. "Stay here," he muttered, sweeping the beam of his flashlight across the living room. But when he reached the front windows, there was nothing. No figure, no sound, just the whisper of the wind through the chimney. We sat huddled together until dawn, barely breathing, the silence pressing in from all sides. When the police arrived later that morning, their cruisers flashing red and blue against the cliffside mist, they searched every inch of the property, the woods, the shoreline, even the narrow paths between the pines. Nothing. One officer, a tired-looking man with gray stubble, gave us a sympathetic smile. "Probably some prankster," he said. "Happens near the coast sometimes." I nodded, but inside I knew better. The fear still throbbed in my chest, raw and alive. Rowan gripped my arm so tightly I could feel her nails through my sleeve. "I'm never going back down there," she whispered. "Me neither," I said. And I meant it. A week later, the news broke. A maintenance worker had found an old shed half a mile from Harper's property. Inside were 5 bodies, decaying, sunken, long forgotten. Police tape fluttered in the sea wind like a warning. When I saw the report on TV, the torn jackets, the knife they'd recovered, I felt my stomach turn to ice. The smell. The figure. We hadn't imagined any of it. We'd just been lucky. That night, we sat together in Harper's living room again. No music, no laughter. The air between us was thick and quiet, heavy with something none of us could name. Outside, the pines swayed in the wind, and I could swear I heard whispers carried in from the cliffs. After that, sleepovers were canceled for good. For weeks, I barely slept. Every time the house creaked, I jolted awake. Every gust of wind against the window made my pulse spike. Rowan stayed with her aunt for a while, saying she needed somewhere quieter. Even Harper changed. Her spark dimmed, her voice smaller. My mom's words replayed in my mind over and over. Trust your instincts. Back then, it had sounded like something parents said to make you feel careful, but now it echoed like a truth I'd been too naive to understand. Safety, I realized, wasn't something you could take for granted. It could vanish in the span of a heartbeat, replaced by a cold wind and the echo of footsteps in the dark. We tried to move on, talking about school, gossip, normal things, but conversations always circled back to that night. The what-ifs, the almosts. We learned to check the trails during the day, to never walk alone, to trust the gut feeling that twisted in your stomach when something felt wrong. Even when no one else believed you, especially then. Years have passed, but sometimes when I visit Seabrook, I still catch that same smell of salt and rot on the wind. It brings the memory back so vividly that I can almost see the cliffs, the pines, and that pale figure slipping between them. That night taught me something that's never left me. Danger doesn't always roar. Sometimes it watches, sometimes it waits. Childhood ended for me on that cliff. What replaced it wasn't fear exactly, it was awareness. The kind that sharpens you, the kind that makes you listen to the quiet, because safety is never promised and innocence isn't armor. Trusting your instincts doesn't make you paranoid. It keeps you alive. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's knowing what's out there and walking carefully anyway. I've always remembered that October as the month when the world stopped feeling entirely safe. I was 11, still caught somewhere between childhood and something harder to define, and my friends, Nolan, Beckett, and Felix, were the people I trusted more than anyone else on earth. We grew up in Ashwood, Maine, a small town stitched together by narrow streets and old houses with peeling paint and watchful windows. Our neighborhood sat on the outskirts, where Victorian estates sprawled like forgotten kingdoms. My house had one of the largest gardens, wild, overgrown, and almost defiant against time. The bushes tangled into one another, the trees leaned and groaned with age, and the gate at the far end of the yard creaked every time the wind brushed it, like it had been swinging since the Civil War. That weekend in 2008, the four of us decided to camp out in my backyard. It seemed like one of those harmless ideas kids have. Roast marshmallows, tell ghost stories, fall asleep laughing under a tent that smelled faintly of mildew. I was the youngest, quiet and a bit awkward, more interested in model airplanes and tinkering with scrap wood than in roughhousing. Nolan was the fearless one, always the first to jump fences or wander where he shouldn't. Beckett was our observer. Nothing escaped his sharp eyes. He noticed patterns in the cracks of pavement, the way the trees moved when the wind shifted. And Felix, the oldest by a few months, carried himself like a big brother. Protective. Calm. The kind of kid who always said, "Don't worry, I've got this." Words that on that night would take on a meaning none of us could have understood. We spent the afternoon running wild across the garden, our breath steaming in the cold air. We kicked a soccer ball until our shoes were muddy and played baseball with a dented aluminum bat, until the sun sank low and the light turned golden. The air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. Every sound carried. The echo of our laughter bouncing off the side of the house, the rustle of branches in the distance. At one point I noticed that one of the garden gates, the one that led straight into the woods, was hanging slightly open. I was certain I'd latched it earlier. "Hey," I called, pointing. "Did anyone open that?" Nolan barely looked up from where he was tying his shoe. "Probably me," he said with a shrug. "I kicked the ball that way earlier." I wanted to believe him, but the uneasy knot in my stomach tightened anyway. The gate swayed a little in the breeze, squealing softly as it moved. By the time the sun disappeared, the garden was swallowed by shadow. We set up our tents close to the fire pit, the air stinging our cheeks. The lantern light flickered across the grass, throwing our faces into gold and shadow. Felix kept the fire steady while we roasted marshmallows and argued about who told the best ghost stories. Nolan was loud and dramatic. Beckett told his in a whisper, making us lean closer to hear. I remember catching Felix staring toward the tree line, his jaw tense, his marshmallow half burned. He didn't say a word, just smiled when he noticed me watching and said softly, "Don't worry, kid. Nothing's getting past me tonight. Later, when the fire burned low, Nolan suggested we play flashlight hide-and-seek, the kind of game that only felt thrilling because we thought we were safe. The beams of our flashlights cut through the dark like thin blades, lighting up patches of fog that had begun to creep through the grass. I crouched behind one of the old hedges near the edge of the garden, the damp earth cold beneath my knees. My breath came out in small clouds. That's when I saw it. A tall, thin figure stood near the open gate, still, watching. The coat it wore hung awkwardly, too long, brushing the tops of the weeds. I couldn't hear footsteps or breathing, just the faint squeak of the gate swaying beside it. My chest locked up. "Felix," I whispered, barely able to get the word out. He swung his flashlight toward me, the beam jittering across the hedge. "What?" I pointed. "Someone's out there." Felix's face paled as he turned the light toward the gate. But the figure was gone. The gate stood open, creaking slightly, the woods behind it motionless. The air suddenly felt heavier, colder. "Probably nothing," he said, trying to steady his voice. "Shadow, maybe. Let's head back, okay?" But Nolan wasn't ready to back off. He jogged over, flashlight swinging. "Come on, you guys seriously think it's a ghost or something? It's probably just a deer. Let's check it out. If we all go together, what's the worst that could happen?" Beckett looked uneasy. "It didn't move like an animal," he murmured. "Exactly," Nolan said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "All the more reason to find out what it was." I remember hesitating, the back of my neck prickling. Felix's hand brushed my shoulder, a silent warning, but he didn't stop Nolan. So we followed him. The grass was slick with dew as we stepped toward the gate, our flashlights flickering over roots and thorns. The shadows there seemed thicker than anywhere else, like the darkness itself was waiting for us. Around midnight, I woke to the faint crunch of footsteps. At first, I thought it was Nolan sneaking around again, trying to scare us. But then I heard the slow drag of a boot against the damp grass, measured, deliberate. The sound came closer. The zipper on one of the tents rasped softly, breaking the night's silence. "Guys?" Felix whispered from somewhere in the dark. His voice trembled. A shape passed through the edge of the lantern light, tall, lean, and wrong somehow. Then he stepped fully into view. A man, maybe in his 40s, with stringy, unkempt hair and sunken cheeks. His eyes were dark and sharp, reflecting the lantern glow like glass. His clothes hung loose, filthy, his coat smeared with mud. "What are you kids doing out here?" he asked, his tone calm but mocking. Each word drawn out like he already knew the answer and knew exactly how frightened we were. For a moment, none of us moved. Nolan, trying to be brave, stepped forward. This is private property," he stammered. "You need to leave." The man tilted his head, his mouth curling slightly, not in a smile, but something close to one. "Private property," he repeated like it was a joke. "Hey, back off," Felix shouted, his voice cracking. The man took one more step. His boots made no sound this time. I could smell him, sweat, damp soil, and something metallic. Then, without warning, he lunged. His hand shot out, rough fingers locking around my ankle through the thin fabric of my pajama pants. The cold of his skin seared me. I screamed, kicking wildly until his grip slipped. "Let go, let go!" Nolan and Beckett grabbed my arms, dragging me backward as Felix swung a flashlight at the man's head. The beam flared across his face for an instant, wide, furious eyes and teeth clenched tight, before he staggered back, muttering something under his breath that none of us understood. We ran. Tripping, shouting, gasping, we tore across the garden toward the porch. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I could hear it. Behind us, I caught a final glimpse of him standing near the fire pit, his outline blurred by the dying light, before he melted into the darkness beyond the gate. My dad burst from the back door, barefoot, gripping a baseball bat. "What happened?" he yelled. "There was a man. He grabbed her," Felix panted, pointing toward the trees. My father didn't hesitate. He charged into the yard, shouting into the blackness. But by the time he reached the gate, the man was gone. We huddled together in the living room, wrapped in blankets that smelled of detergent and smoke. The house, usually warm and familiar, suddenly felt too big. Every creak in the floor, every gust of wind outside made us flinch. My mom's hand shook as she dialed the police. Officers arrived within minutes, flashlights sweeping through the garden, radios crackling softly. They took our statements, asked the same questions in different ways. What did he look like? Which direction did he go? Did he say anything else? But all we could offer were fragments, shadows, sounds, fear. When they left, the lead officer's voice was calm but distant. He probably headed into the woods, he said. We'll keep patrols in the area. It didn't sound like a promise. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, making the house look deceptively peaceful. Dew glittered across the lawn. The gate stood closed as if it had never been disturbed. But the stillness felt wrong. Too quiet, too clean. The garden, once alive with our laughter, seemed to hold its breath. None of us talked much that day. Nolan avoided eye contact. Felix sat at the table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. Beckett kept staring toward the window as though expecting someone to appear. That weekend marked an invisible line in our lives. We never camped out there again. The tent stayed folded in the garage, gathering dust. Sometimes I'd lie awake, long after everyone had gone to bed, and picture that man at the gate, his hollow face, his voice dripping with quiet mockery. I'd imagine how long he might have been standing there, watching us before he stepped into the light. It was then I understood that childhood isn't just about growing up, it's about realizing the world doesn't owe you safety. Even the places that feel like home can betray you. The garden that once felt like a kingdom of adventures now carried a shadow I couldn't shake. I learned that night that courage means nothing without caution, that trust should be earned, and that fear, when it whispers, should never be ignored. I was never much of a social guy. Most nights my apartment smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old vinyl, comforting in its own lonely way. The heater rattled in protest every time I turned it on, fogging the windows with tired breath. Ashwood University was small enough that everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did, but that had never mattered to me. My nights were predictable, working behind the espresso machine at the downtown cafe, then coming home to grade communications papers and pretend I didn't notice how quiet it always was. It was a crisp October evening in 2023, the kind where the wind sliced through your jacket and carried that earthy mix of wet leaves and asphalt. I'd just finished closing the cafe, wiping down the espresso machine, stacking cups, mopping the floor, and finally collapsed onto my sagging couch. Out of boredom, I opened a dating app I'd downloaded months earlier and barely used. Most profiles blurred together, same forced smiles, same half-hearted bios. Then somewhere between all the sameness I saw her, Violet Mercer. Auburn hair that caught the light just right, sharp gray-green eyes, and a crooked smile that looked half daring, half amused. Her bio was clever, something about bad coffee, worse professors, and her ongoing feud with the snooze button. I swiped right, not expecting anything. A few minutes later, my screen lit up. It's a match. Our conversation started casually. So, you actually enjoy grading papers? She typed. Only when I'm in a self-destructive mood, I replied. She sent back a laughing emoji, but somehow I could hear the laugh. Short, bright, real. It hooked me in more than I wanted to admit. We talked about everything, classes, weird professors, bad cafeteria food. She was quick, unpredictable, and funny in that unfiltered way that made silence impossible. By mid-November, we were meeting in person. Casual coffees on campus. Study sessions where she'd lean close and whisper sarcastic commentary about people walking by, until I forgot what I was supposed to be reading. One night after a walk beneath the amber streetlights, our hands brushed and didn't pull away. That's when we made it official. At first, it was perfect. Violet had this way of turning dull moments vivid. She loved midnight walks, stealing pastries from the bakery where she worked, and making me playlists full of bands I'd never heard of but instantly loved. I started waiting for her texts, her knock on my door, her voice saying my name like it meant something special. But cracks appeared, quiet at first, then widening. She started texting constantly whenever I hung out with friends. A group selfie with my lab partner, who happened to be female, sparked an icy, passive-aggressive message. Cute. Didn't know you had a thing for chemistry partners. I told myself it was just jealousy. A sign she cared too much. That's what people in love did, right? By December, it wasn't cute anymore. 10-minute delays in replying to her texts turned into frantic calls, angry messages, guilt-ridden apologies. She never mentioned friends outside of me, barely family either, and somehow, little by little, my world started to shrink until it was just her voice filling it. One night, I told her I needed time to catch up with Lena, a childhood friend who was passing through town. Her response came sharp and cold through the phone. "Why her? Are you sure it's just talking?" "Violet, come on," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "She's like a sister to me." "Right," she said flatly. "Funny how people always say that before they cheat." The line went dead before I could answer. I remember sitting there, phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen while the heater hummed. Something in me wanted to brush it off, pretend it was stress or insecurity. But another part, smaller, quieter, felt the first tug of fear. A week later, that fear became something heavier. It was a Friday night at Oakwood Bar. I'd just finished my last shift of the week and joined some coworkers for a few drinks. Violet had wanted to come, but I told her I needed a night to decompress. By 1:50 a.m., I slipped outside to call a cab, breath turning to mist under the streetlight. When the taxi dropped me off at my building, I froze. She was there, standing by the entrance, pacing, her coat open despite the cold. "Violet?" I asked, startled. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes darted up, wild and glinting. "I saw you sneaking off." "What?" I took a step back. "Sneaking off where?" "Don't lie to me," her voice cracked. "You were with her, weren't you?" "I was calling a cab, Violet," I said carefully, palms raised. "That's it. I was calling a damn cab." She stared at me for a long, awful second, eyes trembling, breath sharp in the night air. Then her expression twisted into something I didn't recognize. "Don't treat me like I'm stupid," she hissed. The street around us was empty. Just the sound of wind pushing through the alley and the faint hum of the bar's neon sign flickering in the distance. "Violet," I said softly, "you need to go home." Her lip quivered. "Home? You mean away from you?" "That's not what I—" But she was already walking backward, shaking her head like she couldn't hear me. That was the night I realized something was shifting, something I couldn't joke or reason away anymore. Before I could react, she slammed her palm against my chest and yanked my arm hard, her fingers digging deep into my skin. Pain and panic shot through me. "Violet, stop." I tried to hold her wrists gently just to calm her down, but her eyes went cold and sharp. She hissed between her teeth. "I could call the cops right now and tell them you hurt me." I froze. My heart dropped. "Violet, please. This isn't you. This isn't okay." Her voice dropped to a low growl, lips brushing my ear. "You'll regret this." Something in me cracked open, a mix of anger and fear. I realized reason wasn't going to reach her anymore. My voice came out firm, final. "We're done. I'm ending this." She muttered something under her breath, too soft to catch, but I didn't wait. I walked past her, into my building, slammed the door and turned the bolt. The echo of the lock clicked like an exhale I didn't know I'd been holding. For a moment I felt weightless. But beneath that relief was a sinking truth. This wasn't over. The next week proved it. Violet's messages came in bursts, pleading one minute, furious the next, then eerily calm. Long paragraphs at 2 a.m. followed by single words like coward. My phone buzzed nonstop during my cafe shifts, her name lighting the screen until I started keeping it face down. The exhaustion became physical, tight chest, jumpy nerves. One afternoon, my coworker showed me a screenshot from Violet's social media. She was standing next to a heavy-set bearded guy with tattoos creeping up his neck. The caption read, "Finally with someone real." But his glare, the way he stared straight into the camera, made my stomach twist. That Saturday night, sometime past midnight, pounding rattled my apartment door. I bolted upright on the couch, half dreaming, half paralyzed. A man's voice bellowed from the hall, deep, slurred, furious. "Open the door, you little punk." "Violet sent me," said you messed her up. I scrambled for my phone, hands trembling. 911, I stammered. "Someone's trying to break in." The man kicked the door again, the frame groaning. "Come out and take what's coming to you." Sirens cut through the distance just as he hurled one last threat. The cops pulled him away, shouting, handcuffing him while he spat obscenities over his shoulder. I stayed crouched on the couch, shaking so hard I thought I might vomit. Even when they said it was over, I couldn't move. The sound of fists on wood still echoed in my skull. The next morning, I filed a restraining order. Printed every text, saved every message. My hands trembled as I stapled the papers together, but beneath that tremor was something new: control. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I might actually reclaim my life. A few days later, I unblocked Violet. Against all logic, I needed to hear her acknowledge it. Needed her to say something real. "Why are you doing this to me?" I typed. Her reply came fast. "I don't know what you mean, Ethan. Just that." Flat calculated, like none of it had happened. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Then I locked my phone and never wrote back. Weeks passed. Then her account vanished. No profile, no trace. I expected relief, and it came, but quieter than I imagined. The world didn't feel lighter. Just still. I realized closure wasn't an event. It was silence. It was waking up without waiting for another notification. I started spending time with people again. Mostly with Lena. She never asked for details. She just listened. We walked late into the night, sipping coffee, laughing about old stories that had nothing to do with fear. That distance, the breathing room, felt like rediscovering a forgotten version of myself. The one that didn't flinch at every buzz of a phone. Years later, Ashwood feels different, softer. The campus paths that once carried her shadow now feel like mine again. I've built something stable. A real relationship, patient and grounded, surrounded by friends who know what boundaries mean. The memory of Violet Mercer still lingers, but only as a quiet, cautionary ghost. I don't hate her anymore. I don't even fear her. I just remember her as a storm that taught me how to build stronger walls. Love can blind you. It can masquerade as passion when it's really control. It can whisper promises while quietly eroding your sense of self. I learned the hard way that survival in love, like in life, depends on awareness, courage, and the ability to leave before you lose yourself completely. Sometimes I still pass Oakwood Bar on my way home. I'll catch the neon flicker of its sign and feel that old heartbeat of fear in my chest, but only faintly now. I think about that night, the pacing, the shouting, the look in her eyes, and then I think about everything that came after. Boundaries matter. Intuition matters. And when someone refuses to respect either, walking away, no matter how lonely it feels, isn't weakness. It's survival. Because obsession can look a lot like love until you see what it becomes in the dark. And sometimes courage isn't fighting to stay. It's having the strength to go. I've always thought of myself as the kind of person who drifts through life unnoticed. Not shy exactly, just the type who doesn't take up much space. In 2018, I was 19, a sophomore at Burlington University in Vermont, and my days moved with the same rhythm as the squeak of the old door at the hardware store where I worked part-time. The shop sat a few blocks from campus, wedged between a laundromat that always smelled faintly of detergent and a used bookstore that reeked of dust and old paper. It wasn't glamorous, but it covered rent and groceries. Honestly, I didn't mind it. I liked the scent of fresh-cut lumber, the metallic tang of nails and screws, the steady hum of the place, the quiet satisfaction of helping someone leave with a problem solved, and a brown paper bag swinging from their hand. When things slowed down, I'd sketch, mostly tools or little inventions I imagined might make work easier. Mr. Denning, my boss, never complained. He was an older man, thin as the rake handles we sold, and believed that good ideas started in daydreams. "That's how inventions are born," he said once, tapping his knuckle on my notebook. Somebody's daydream turned real. Miles, my best friend, loved to tease me about that. He was the noise to my quiet, hosting a late-night college radio show and dragging me into whatever nonsense he thought would make life less boring. Sometimes he'd drop by the shop, leaning on the counter with that infuriating grin. "You've got romance hiding between the screws and sandpaper," he'd say. "Romance?" I'd laugh. "You think love's buried in a box of washers?" "Not washers," he'd say. "Maybe paintbrushes. Some artsy girl's gonna walk in here asking about screwdrivers and walk out with your heart." I'd roll my eyes, but he wasn't completely wrong. I'd had a couple of short, forgettable relationships, awkward first dates, fizzled texts, but nothing that ever stuck. And for the most part, that was fine. My life was simple. Classes, shifts at the store, sketching, the occasional burger run with Miles. Safe. But when you're 19, safe can start to feel like a cage. I guess part of me wanted someone to shake things up. I just didn't know what form that would take. That something showed up on a rainy Tuesday night. The rain had been steady all day, soft and hypnotic, drumming against my apartment windows until the streets outside glistened under the streetlights. The kind of weather that convinces you to stay in, maybe cook something cheap and watch the world blur behind glass. I was sprawled on my bed, half-heartedly flipping through engineering notes when I opened a dating app out of boredom. Same usual parade of faces, posed smiles, half-baked quotes, promises of adventure and caffeine dependency. Then I saw her, Clara Vale. Her photo wasn't flashy, shoulder-length brown hair, no filters, eyes that looked like they laughed even when her mouth didn't. Her bio said, artist, coffee addict, maple syrup enthusiast. Let's argue about Vermont versus Canada. I chuckled, thumb hovering. Then I swiped right. The screen blinked. It's a match. My chest gave this stupid, sudden buzz, like waking from a long nap and remembering I was still young enough to feel excited about strangers. Our first messages came easy, too easy. Me. Vermont syrup wins. No debate. Clara. Bold words from a guy who probably buys store-brand pancakes. Me. College budget. You offering to upgrade me? Clara. Only if you admit Canada's the real deal. We went back and forth for hours talking about professors we couldn't stand, favorite diners, childhood embarrassments. She was sharp, funny, quick, unafraid to call me out when I dodged a question. By the time I finally set my phone down, the rain had eased into a whisper, and I just lay there staring at the ceiling, realizing that for the first time in months, I was waiting for someone's next message. I didn't know it then, but the image of that yellow umbrella she carried the first time we met would stay burned into my memory, not as a symbol of love, but as a warning I'd understand far too late. Meeting Clara in person felt like stepping into a scene I'd been rehearsing without knowing it. After 2 weeks of late-night chats, we agreed to meet for coffee at a small shop near Church Street Marketplace. The rain had calmed to a drizzle and I got there early, nursing a chipped ceramic mug to calm my nerves. When she walked in, clutching that bright yellow umbrella, she didn't just enter the room, she shifted it. She laughed as she nearly tripped over the curb outside before pushing open the door, cheeks flushed, eyes wide and alive. Ryan? She asked, brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. Yeah, I said, standing up so fast my chair nearly toppled. I almost broke my neck out there, she said, grinning as she shook the umbrella dry. Would have been a short date. I laughed, and just like that, the tension melted. We sat down and the conversation flowed. Clara had this magnetic energy. She talked with her hands, words tumbling fast, eyes glowing as she described her art. Murals, sketches, messy experiments with whatever materials she could find. She had opinions about everything, movies, politics, food trucks, and I wanted to hear them all. By the time we left, the streetlights were smudging against wet cobblestone. She teased me about seeing the world like an engineer, measuring angles, predicting outcomes. I teased her about her umbrella, calling it something a cartoon character would carry. When we finally hugged goodbye, my chest felt lighter than it had in years. I hadn't expected it, but Clara was different. The weeks that followed blurred together. Movie nights that stretched until morning. Trips to dusty bookstores where she'd pull random titles off the shelves and make me read them dramatically in public. Study sessions where she pretended to learn about torque and resistance while doodling on my blueprints. Sometimes she'd sketch little hearts or strange symbols in the corners of my notes. She said it made the math less lonely. And maybe it did. Even Miles noticed. Man, you're glowing, he said one afternoon, elbowing me at our usual burger spot. She better not be replacing me as your burger buddy. She's not replacing anybody, I said, forcing a laugh. But even I could hear the hesitation in my own voice. Because deep down I knew the truth. I was falling hard, faster than I wanted to admit. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs early. The way her messages stacked up if I didn't reply within minutes. The flicker of jealousy when I mentioned plans that didn't include her. At the time, I told myself it meant she cared, that she was passionate, invested. I thought that was what love looked like. But really, those were just the first cracks forming beneath the surface. By the 4th month, Clara and I were inseparable, or at least, That's how she wanted it. She started showing up at the hardware store unannounced, leaning on the counter with that too bright smile, scanning every aisle like she was hunting for someone. One afternoon, Mr. Denning pulled me aside. "She seems spirited," he said carefully. I laughed it off. "Yeah, she just likes to visit." But when I turned back, I could feel her eyes on me, the way her body tensed if a woman even smiled while asking for help. It didn't stop there. A photo of me and Miles at a small get-together sent her spiraling. "Who's that girl standing next to you?" She texted. "She's dating my friend James," I replied. "Doesn't look like it." "You're smiling too much." I tried explaining, but every answer bred another accusation. The questions never stopped. I kept trying to reassure her, to prove my loyalty, but somehow it was never enough. When I told her maybe we needed a little space, she broke down crying. "You're abandoning me," she said between sobs. "You don't care about me the way I care about you." And somehow that worked. I stayed. Miles wasn't fooled. "She's not just jealous, man," he said, leaning across the diner table one night. "She's controlling you." I shook my head. "You don't get it." "No," he said quietly. "You don't get it. You're too close to see it." I wanted to believe he was wrong, but love, real or not, has a way of clouding judgment. When you're burning that bright, it's hard to tell the difference between warmth and getting burned. The night everything collapsed was bitterly cold, the kind of Vermont night that cuts through your jacket and hangs your breath in the air. I'd been out with Miles and a few friends at a bar near campus. Nothing wild, burgers, a couple beers, laughter. By the time I trudged home, it was past 2 in the morning. She was waiting. Clara stood outside my apartment door, her yellow umbrella missing for once, her hair wild from the wind. The second she saw me, she launched into a fury. "Where were you? Who were you with? You think I don't know?" Before I could get a word out, her palm cracked across my face. The sound rang in my ears. "Clara, stop," I said, stepping back. But she followed, shouting, trembling, her hands flying. "I'll never let you go," she screamed. "You're mine. You'll regret trying to leave me." Fear coursed through me. I caught her wrists, holding her back, my voice shaking. "You need to calm down. I'm calling the police." Her eyes widened, then narrowed into something I'd never seen before. "You wouldn't dare." But I did. My hands shook as I dialed 911. She backed away, muttering apologies, excuses, half-choked promises. By the time the officers arrived, she was gone, swallowed by the night. The days after were worse. My phone lit up with apologies, then angry tirades, then threats. I blocked her, but she found new numbers, new accounts. It was like trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. The messages kept coming until I finally silenced my phone altogether. I told myself it would fade, that she'd move on, that I could forget, but I was wrong. One Saturday evening, there was a knock at my door. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The sound echoed through the apartment like a warning. I peeked through the blinds and froze. A man I'd never seen before stood there. Broad shoulders, clenched fists, jaw set hard. He wasn't Clara, but I'd seen him before in a photo a mutual friend had sent. Clara stood beside him in that picture, smiling, her arm looped around his. He pounded again. "Open up!" he shouted, voice raw and angry. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text, "He knows your car." Another, "He knows where you live." I didn't open the door. My pulse hammered as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Outside, glass shattered my car windshield, I realized. I stayed frozen until I saw flashing lights paint the walls. But by the time police arrived, the man was gone. They caught him days later. He'd confessed enough for them to piece it together. The harassment, the stalking, the messages, the plan. Clara had sent him, told him to scare me, to punish me for walking away. I filed a restraining order, changed my locks, deleted every trace of her number, and tried to rebuild. Slowly, painfully, I learned what love wasn't. Months later, I met someone new. She was patient, steady, kind, the kind of person who didn't need constant reassurance, who made silence feel safe. With her, I could breathe again. Still, sometimes when I walk along Church Street and see a flash of yellow moving through the crowd, my stomach knots. The memory strikes sharp, a reminder etched deep. Obsession had dressed itself as love, and I'd almost handed it my freedom. Love isn't supposed to cage you, to shrink you, to make you afraid of being yourself. Real love gives you air, it lets you grow, not vanish. Intensity isn't devotion, passion isn't care, and obsession, no matter how gentle it starts, always rots into something cruel. If you ever find yourself mistaking fear for love, remember this: love that's real won't make you feel trapped. It'll make you feel free. I still remember the first time I met Owen Wallace. We were 5 years old, sitting cross-legged on the green linoleum floor of Brighton Falls Elementary, staring up at the teacher like we'd just been dropped onto a different planet. Owen had this crooked, mischievous smile, like he knew a secret the rest of us would never figure out. I can't explain it, but I knew right then I wanted that kid on my side. All through childhood, we were practically glued together. We'd bike along the forest trails that hugged the edge of town, sneak into the creek after curfew, and pull off dares that usually ended with scraped knees and us laughing until our stomachs hurt. We spent nights playing video games until dawn, arguing over snacks and pretending we weren't scared of the dark. If anyone asked for a partner in crime, the answer was automatic: him and me. Our friendship felt indestructible, like it was built into our bones. Then came January 2022, the month everything fractured. I was at a weekend art workshop in Portland, painting landscapes with borrowed brushes that made the sky blur into impossible colors. I remember feeling content for once, until my phone started buzzing again and again in my backpack. When I finally pulled it out, I saw 5 missed calls from Owen's mom and 1 voicemail that made the world tilt. I don't remember the drive home. Just rain and fog smeared across the windshield, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tight they hurt. None of that matters, though. What matters is the fire. Owen's family home, the same one with creaky floors and the smell of cinnamon bread on Sunday mornings, was gone. The firefighters said he'd been trapped in his room. The words sounded foreign, like something spoken through static. Trapped, gone. My best friend was gone. Brighton Falls went quiet. The town lit candles along the sidewalks, people whispered condolences in grocery aisles and church steps. But none of it sounded real. Their voices felt like wind passing through hollow walls. I drifted through the days, class, meals, sleep that never lasted. At night, I replayed our last conversation in my head, trying to catch some clue I might have missed. His laugh, the way he'd said, "See you soon." Then came the sightings. At first, I told myself it was just grief twisting my mind, a shadow with his shape, a reflection in a storefront window, a stranger with the same smirk. But then it started happening too often. I'd see him behind the grocery counter, half smiling, at the edge of my dorm window, just standing there in the dark. Once, while walking the forest trail, I felt someone fall into step beside me. When I turned, he was there, crooked smile, same stance, eyes meeting mine like nothing had changed. Every time I froze. Every time he looked so alive. Then one night in March, I woke up to a whisper. Soft. Close. Right beside my ear. It wasn't an accident. "You locked me in." My body went rigid. The voice wasn't a dream, I knew that voice. Owen's, and then the memory hit me. Months before the fire, during one of our stupid dares, I'd wedged a chair under his doorknob, trapping him in his room while he yelled for me to stop. We'd both laughed, and he'd shoved the door open easily. I hadn't thought about it since, but now hearing those words, my stomach dropped through the mattress. The next morning, I drove to the police station. My hands shook so badly I could barely sign in. I told them everything. About the prank, about what I heard, about how maybe this was all my fault. I thought confessing might lift the weight. Maybe guilt could be traded for truth. But what the detective told me made the world spin. The fire hadn't started from faulty wiring or a candle left burning. It had been set deliberately from inside Owen's room. I remember staring at him numb. "That's impossible," I said. "He was trapped inside." The detective just sighed. "That's what we can't figure out." After that, I stopped sleeping. Every creak in my apartment made me flinch. Every reflection looked like him. My brain kept looping back to the whisper. "You locked me in." It threaded through my thoughts like smoke, curling tighter every day. Sometimes I'd see him and he'd look almost gentle, like he was watching over me. Other times his stare was cold, accusing. Each glimpse left me shaking. Had I caused it? Had my stupid prank triggered something darker? Eventually I couldn't stand it anymore. I drove back to Brighton Falls to see the ruins. The police had cordoned off most of the property, but the fire marshal, an older man who'd known my parents, let me walk the perimeter. The smell hit first: damp ash, scorched insulation, the sharp chemical tang of whatever accelerant had fed the blaze. My boots crunched over debris, every step releasing tiny puffs of black dust. The air felt heavier there, like grief had soaked into the soil. The charred skeleton of the house stood silent against the gray sky, and for a moment I thought I saw him again. Just a shape, a flicker through the haze, standing in what used to be his room, watching me. I reached what was left of Owen's room. The walls were blackened, brittle, curling in on themselves like burned paper. The air inside was colder, still heavy with that sour metallic tang of old smoke. And then I saw it, scratched into the plaster, jagged and uneven but unmistakable. Lucas. My stomach twisted. The handwriting was his. My knees went weak, and I had to grip what remained of the doorframe just to steady myself. Tears stung my eyes, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Why would he write my name? What had he been trying to tell me? My mind screamed while my chest ached so violently I thought I'd collapse right there in the ruins. That night back in my apartment, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly in the dark. My thoughts spun even faster. I hadn't meant to hurt him, God, I never had, but was that enough? Could an apology fix something like this? I realized grief wasn't just sadness. It was guilt tangled with memory, an endless loop of what-ifs and if-onlys. And then somewhere between exhaustion and understanding, it hit me. Owen hadn't been haunting me out of anger. He'd been protecting me. The thought crept in like cold water seeping into my veins, slow but undeniable. He must have known something that night. Something worse than my childish prank, something he'd never told me. And I'd been too blind, too naive to see it. After that, I started walking the streets of Brighton Falls more deliberately. I'd look into every reflection, every passing face, hoping to catch even a glimpse of him. Sometimes I did. In the glass of a darkened storefront, I'd see him leaning casually against a wall, that same crooked grin lighting his face. "Owen?" I'd whisper, my voice trembling. But he never moved. Never spoke. His presence hovered at the edges of reality, just close enough to feel, never close enough to touch. It left me doubting my sanity. One night I went back to the burned house. I didn't tell anyone. I just needed closure maybe, or proof. The rain was light but constant, the kind that feels like mist until it chills your skin. I pushed open the warped gate and stepped into the yard, my flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The house loomed before me like a hollow carcass. I whispered his name, Owen. For a moment there was only the rain, and then something moved. A flicker, a shimmer near the room where he'd died. My heart pounded as I raised the light, but all I saw was drifting smoke or maybe steam from the wet wood. Still, the air felt charged, like the house was holding its breath. I froze, caught between dread and longing. Somewhere deep inside, I could almost feel him watching, alive somehow, but why? Was he warning me? Guiding me? Or still trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear? I couldn't let it go. I started digging into the case, begging for access to the investigation files. When I finally got them, one small detail made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. The fire hadn't just been set inside, it had been set to trap someone. And based on the burn patterns, that someone could only have been Owen. But why would he stay? I met with Fire Marshal Jenkins, an old friend of Owen's dad. His office smelled faintly of smoke and old coffee. He looked tired when I told him what I'd found. "Lucas," he said quietly, folding his hands. "Your friend, he stayed because he was trying to protect someone else. That's who he was." I stared at him. "Protect who?" He just sighed. "That's something we'll probably never know." I walked out into the drizzle feeling both hollow and strangely lighter. He hadn't blamed me. Owen had chosen to stay. He'd sacrificed himself for someone else, maybe even for me. The guilt I'd been dragging around for months wasn't the truth, it was just my punishment for not understanding sooner. But knowing didn't make the ache fade. Some losses carve so deep they become part of you. Time passed, but Brighton Falls never felt the same. The laughter on Main Street sounded thinner, the air quieter. I still walk those streets sometimes, eyes tracing the corners of windows, the shifting patterns of shadows. Every now and then, I feel him there. Sometimes it's comforting, other times, it chills me to my core. The memories come back in waves, the forest trails, the daring midnight swims, his lopsided grin when he beat me at games, They're bittersweet now, like old film reels playing through smoke. I've come to understand something I couldn't before. Grief isn't just sorrow, it's vigilance. It's learning to live beside the echoes of what you've lost. It's awareness of what you can never fix, and the quiet acceptance that not all wounds close. Owen's life and the way he left it taught me that some marks never fade. You just learn to carry them, because guilt can blind you, but love, real, unwavering love, teaches you to see again. And maybe that's what he wanted me to understand, that even in tragedy, even through fire and loss, love and loyalty endure. It's strange how ordinary nights can burn themselves into your memory, not because of what you planned, but because of what went wrong instead. Looking back now, November 2016 doesn't feel that long ago, but in my head it's a lifetime away. I was 16 then, restless and awkward, caught between wanting to grow up fast and secretly wishing I could still be a kid. That Friday night, rain hammered against the windows of my family's new house. We'd only moved in a month earlier, a big, older place tucked into one of Portland's quieter neighborhoods. From the outside, it looked like the kind of house people called charming. White siding, a wide porch, a yard where the grass never quite dried. But inside, especially in the basement, there was something else. Something I hadn't gotten used to yet. The basement was massive, unfinished, and smelled like damp concrete and metal. Half of it was swallowed by stacks of cardboard boxes from the move, piled like crooked towers. Old furniture leaned against the walls. Rusted tools crowded wooden shelves. In the far corner sat the furnace, an old clunky beast that groaned and rattled when it kicked on. Even with the ceiling bulbs glaring bright, the corners never cleared. The shadows clung like they had nowhere else to go. That night, my best friend Elias came over for a sleepover. We'd been friends since 6th grade, bonded first over video games, then over taking apart electronics we couldn't always put back together. Elias was quiet, careful, the kind of guy who thought twice before doing anything. I was the opposite, loud, impulsive, the one who laughed first and worried later. He brought his brand new VR headset, this bulky monster he'd saved for by mowing lawns all summer. "You sure your basement's big enough for this thing?" Elias asked, eyeing the space as we unrolled our sleeping bags on the cold floor. "Plenty," I said, grinning. "It's basically a dungeon. No one's gonna bother us down here." We set up the headset, dragged an old TV and console onto a low table and plugged everything in. The glow from the screen painted the walls in soft blue light, making the basement almost cozy. Outside, the storm kept steady, rain tapping against the tiny half windows near the ceiling. For a while, everything was perfect. We played co-op shooters, shouting, laughing, talking trash whenever one of us missed a shot. At one point, Elias laughed so hard his headset fogged up. I told him he looked like a robot overheating. Then, somewhere past midnight, came the first sound. Tap. It was faint, so soft it might have been nothing. Elias froze mid-game and lifted the headset. "What was that?" "The house settling," I said automatically. "Old wood does that." But my eyes drifted to the far corner where the furnace sat. The shadows there looked longer, thicker somehow, like they were leaning forward. We went back to playing. Tap. Tap. Elias stopped again, staring toward the corner. I tried to sound casual. "If you're trying to freak me out, it's not working." I laughed a little too fast. It was working. My stomach had knotted up without me noticing. That was the first time I realized how quickly laughter could twist into unease, how fast warmth could drain out of a room. The tapping didn't stop. It came again, a slow rhythmic beat, like fingers drumming against wood. Elias slipped off the headset completely, grabbing the flashlight he'd brought. The beam cut through the dimness, sweeping over boxes and floor. It wavered once, flickered, then steadied. "Look," he whispered. I followed his light, and for a split second I saw it. A flicker of movement, something pale like a hand retreating behind the stack of boxes. My throat went dry. "Nice try," I said, forcing a smirk. "You moved something." Elias's voice was barely a breath. "I didn't, I swear." We both stood. The game was forgotten. Controllers lay on the concrete like dropped weapons. Our sneakers scraped the floor as we crept toward the furnace. Each step echoed louder than it should have, bouncing around the basement, making the space feel cavernous. When we got close, The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It wasn't empty, it was heavy. Like the air itself had thickened. Like the basement was listening. Elias aimed the flashlight behind the boxes. Dust floated in the beam. Old crates. Nothing else. You happy now? I tried to sound casual, but my voice cracked halfway through. He didn't answer. His knuckles were white around the flashlight, his jaw set tight, and I realized he wasn't breathing. We stood there for a moment longer before backing away, pretending it was nothing. But neither of us relaxed. We left the game paused, the TV humming softly, the blue light flickering across the boxes. Then we crawled into our sleeping bags side by side, staring at the low ceiling. The storm hadn't let up. Rain drummed the windows, and each creak of the furnace sounded sharper now, more alive. Every noise felt magnified, every drip, every shift of the pipes under the floor. Around 2 in the morning, my eyelids started to sag, my thoughts blurring. It's just nerves, I told myself. Just the house. Just imagination. That's all. At least that's what I tried to believe. Somewhere around 3, I woke to Elias's hand gripping my arm hard enough to hurt. His face was pale, eyes wide, reflecting the ghostly light from the TV screen. "Listen," he whispered. Tap, tap, tap. Not from the furnace this time. It was coming from the top of the basement stairs. The door. The sound was slower now, deliberate, like someone testing the wood with their knuckles. I stopped breathing. It's following us," Elias murmured. Another tap. Louder. Then silence. Then another. My heartbeat pounded in my throat. I wanted to run upstairs, wake my parents, do anything, but the thought of turning my back on that door froze me solid. "What do we do?" Elias asked, voice trembling. "Go upstairs," I whispered. The words scraped out of me, small and broken, but it was all I had. We stood together, clutching each other's sleeves. The stairs creaked under our feet as we climbed. Each step we took, another knock came, tap, tap, matching our rhythm like something pacing us from the other side. The wood moaned, shadows stretching up the wall ahead. At the top, panic finally ripped free. "Mom, Dad!" I shouted. My voice cracked and echoed down the stairs. The knocking stopped. A light clicked on in the hallway. My dad appeared, rubbing his eyes, confusion written all over his face. Then he saw us, 2 shaking 16-year-olds, and his expression softened. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "There was knocking," I blurted. "On the basement door." "We heard it." Mom appeared behind him, her robe pulled tight. "What knocking?" "Just now," Elias said, breath hitching. Dad sighed but followed us down. He flipped on every light switch as we descended, flooding the basement with harsh, sterile brightness. Every corner, every shadow was laid bare. He checked the door first, nothing. The furnace, nothing. Even pulled open the panel and peered inside. "You two scared yourselves," he said finally. "Stormy night, old house." "It happens." But Elias and I locked eyes. We both knew what we'd heard. That night we gave up on the basement. We dragged our sleeping bags upstairs to the living room. Mom plugged in a little nightlight, the kind shaped like a star, meant for toddlers. Neither of us protested. Every time the house creaked, we jumped. Every gust of wind rattling the windows made our hearts lurch. Sleep came in shallow bursts, and each dream ended with a sound, 3 dull taps echoing in the dark. When morning came, sunlight spilled through the curtains. The storm had passed. Everything looked normal, almost too normal. The air smelled of coffee and toast, and my parents chatted like nothing had happened. But beneath all that, the house felt divided, the basement no longer part of it, like something had been sealed away down there waiting. We never went back alone. Not once. If I needed a tool or a box, I made excuses or waited until Elias came over. He didn't argue.
He understood. We didn't tell anyone else.
Who would believe us? To them, we'd just be 2 scared kids in a creaky old house on a rainy night. But I can still hear that sound sometimes, soft and measured. Too rhythmic to be pipes. Too intentional to be chance. Even now, years later, if I'm in a basement or an old building and hear a knock somewhere behind me, my chest tightens. For a second, I'm 16 again, frozen beside Elias, eyes locked on the dark where shadows shouldn't move. Maybe it was imagination, shaped by exhaustion in a storm. Or maybe it was something real, something curious testing the boundaries of our fear. I'll never know. But that night in November 2016 left a scar that's never faded. Fear has a way of teaching you what reason can't. It blurs the line between real and imagined, between safety and danger. That night taught me that courage isn't pretending you're not afraid. It's knowing you are and still taking the next step, as long as someone you trust is beside you. And sometimes that's the only light you get in the dark. If you've ever lived in a small town, you know how time stretches differently. In my hometown, a sleepy lakeside place in Oregon, fall came with the smell of wet cedar and wood smoke. By early September of 2014, the air had that sharp edge that made you pull your jacket tighter once the sun slipped behind the hills. I was 16, a high school junior, stuck in that limbo between feeling untouchable and quietly suspecting I wasn't. Astronomy was my thing. On clear nights, I'd drag my old telescope out to the dock behind our house, my breath fogging the eyepiece as I traced the constellations. There was something about knowing those stars were impossibly distant, yet still part of a pattern I could name. It made the world feel manageable. Jasper never really got it. He was grounded, the type who preferred ghost stories to galaxies. "Man, you care more about Orion than prom," he joked one night, balancing a soda can on the rail. "And you care more about scaring yourself than passing English," I shot back. That was us. Jasper with his ever-present notebook, scribbling strange ideas, and me, restless, impatient, always chasing something I couldn't name. My mom said we balanced each other out. Maybe she was right. That Friday after the home soccer game, we decided not to wait for my sister's ride. Walking home felt like rebellion, a small slice of freedom before curfew. We cut across the back roads following the old logging trail everyone warned us about. It carved through dense cedar forest, past empty fields where the grass grew tall enough to hide in. Abandoned cabins slumped along the way like forgotten skeletons. Nobody went there after dark, not because of any stories, but because of the way it felt, the woods too still, the air too heavy, as if something unseen was holding its breath. "Bet you won't last 10 minutes without freaking out," I said, nudging him as we turned onto the cracked asphalt. He smirked, tightening his backpack straps. "Bet you'll scream first." The sun was bleeding out across the horizon, staining the trees orange before vanishing completely. Our sneakers crunched on the gravel. The sound echoed weirdly, bouncing back in warped fragments that didn't quite match our rhythm. We started off joking, revisiting dumb memories like the time I screamed at a raccoon near the dumpsters, or when he refused to go into the school basement during a drill because he swore it felt wrong. Our laughter faded as the forest deepened. Cedar branches arched overhead like dark ribs closing us in. I tilted my head up out of habit, searching for stars, but the canopy swallowed them whole. That was when the unease started, just a flicker at first, the kind that makes your neck prickle and your pulse quicken. I tried to shake it off. Just a road, just trees, nothing else. But by the time darkness fully settled, I'd learned how quickly nothing can turn into something. We were halfway down the road when Jasper stopped cold. His hand clamped onto my arm, his voice barely a breath. "Finn, I think someone's following us." I turned, squinting into the dark. The road stretched behind us, cracked and empty. "There's nobody there," I muttered, though I couldn't quite convince myself. Then came the sound. Crunching, soft, deliberate. Footsteps pressing into gravel. They stopped when we did, started when we moved. Jasper's face drained of color, his phone flashlight trembling in his grip. "You hear that, right?" "It's probably an animal," I said, trying for steady but failing. "Deer or something." "Deer don't stop when we stop," he whispered. Crunch, crunch. Closer this time. My pulse hammered in my throat. I forced a laugh that didn't sound like me. Fine, maybe it's just some drunk guy from the game. Who cares? But I did care. We both did. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. Every shift of wind sent a low moan through the branches, thin, uneven, almost like words half-formed carried by the trees. We picked up the pace, the night swallowing our footsteps. My toe caught on a root and I went down hard. Pain ripped through my knee as I hit the ground, the sting sharp and wet. "Damn it," I hissed, brushing dirt from the gash, smearing blood across my jeans. "You okay?" Jasper asked, his flashlight shaking in his grip. "Yeah," I muttered, though my leg burned. Yeah. He clutched his backpack tighter, glancing over his shoulder like he expected something to emerge from the dark. The trees seemed to crowd closer the farther we went. The only sound was the dull rhythmic thud of my heartbeat in my ears. Then Jasper froze again. "We can't keep walking this road," he whispered. "We need to cut through the clearing." "What clearing?" He pointed into the darkness. Between the trunks, a thin break in the canopy glimmered faintly with moonlight. "That way." I hesitated. The road, cracked and eerie as it was, at least had direction. The clearing meant no path, no bearings. "Jasper, that's stupid. We'll get lost." "Come on," he said, his voice trembling. "Trust me." And before I could protest again, he ran straight into the trees, swallowed by the dark. "Jasper," I called, panic cracking through my voice. I had no choice but to follow. Branches whipped against my face, cedar needles cutting into my skin, roots snagged at my shoes, pulling, tripping me. The air felt thick, damp, heavy with sap and rot. I gasped as I stumbled after him, the sound of my own breathing too loud in my ears. "Slow down," I shouted. No answer. The forest erupted in noise, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, a strange low hum vibrating in my chest like the ground itself was alive. Every shadow seemed to twitch, and every direction looked the same. My flashlight beam darted wildly, but the light only made the darkness seem deeper. Then I realized I couldn't hear Jasper anymore. "Jasper." My voice cracked against the silence. Nothing. I spun in circles, the beam slicing through tree trunks and tangled undergrowth. The clearing stretched ahead, silvered by moonlight, pale and endless. I stepped closer, my breath coming shallow and uneven. Something shifted at the far edge, a shape faint but upright. My chest seized. "Jasper?" I called, no answer. Just wind moving through the branches, carrying sounds that almost formed words but never quite did. Whispers that didn't belong to the forest. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches slashing my arms. I didn't stop until my sneakers hit cracked asphalt again. The old road. My lungs burned, my knee screamed, and I realized I was alone. Completely, horribly alone. By the time I stumbled through my front door, I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The house was quiet, Mom asleep, my sister still out. The silence pressed down hard. I dialed Jasper's house, my thumb slipping over the screen. His dad picked up after a few rings, his voice groggy. "Finn, it's late. What's wrong?" My voice cracked. "Is Jasper there?" A pause. "He's been here all night." "Why?" The room tilted. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible. He was with me. He ran into the woods." But the words broke apart before they left my mouth. Because deep down I already knew. Whatever had been beside me on that road, whatever had led me into the trees, it hadn't been Jasper. The days that followed blurred together. I told myself I'd been tired, that the adrenaline had twisted my memory. My mom said maybe I'd imagined it. "You've been stressed," she told me gently. "You just scared yourself." But I knew what I'd felt. The footsteps syncing with mine, the whispering wind, the figure that turned when I called his name. It was real enough to leave a scar. After that night, I avoided the logging road entirely. Even the sight of cedar trees made my chest tighten. I still took my telescope out sometimes, but the stars felt colder, distant in a way they hadn't before. My love for the night sky hadn't vanished, it had just changed. Now I understood how easily the mind could warp what it saw, how quickly familiar things could tilt into something else. Sometimes, walking home late, I still hear it. That soft rhythm, crunch, crunch, footsteps matching my own. I tell myself it's memory, just my nerves replaying that night. But the unease never fades. Because the worst part isn't what happened out there. It's realizing that I trusted the wrong voice. Fear isn't always about what hides in the dark. Sometimes it's about what the dark awakens inside you, how it bends your reality until even your own senses turn against you. And once that happens, once trust fractures, it doesn't heal. It just lingers, quiet, invisible, waiting for the next time you walk down a road that feels a little too silent.